Before we get into this episode of Mindset, I would just like to issue a disclaimer as I will be talking about some very heavy topics. These topics including self-harm, eating disorders and loneliness, along with many other heavy topics. If any of this is triggering to you, please click off and take care of yourself. And I'm sure I'll see you in another episode. Hi, I'm Devyn McQuaid, and you're listening to Mindset. On this episode of Mindset, I'm going to be discussing mental health representation in general television. Now, I'm going to be focusing on specific shows like BoJack Horseman and Heartstopper, along with talking about normal people and how people feel about mental health and how it's represented. Now, this Mindset episode is recorded in a bit of a different way. I have an interview, I have a guest, but not in the studio with me as of right now. So if you want to hear who it is, maybe keep listening to the episode. But let's dive in. Let's talk about our mindset towards mental health and its general representation in television. So mental health in modern television explores the hard parts of life and the different types of mental illnesses. For example, some shows may explore anxiety, depression, or even heavier topics such as drug addiction or alcoholism. One show that has a very good representation of that is BoJack Horseman. BoJack Horseman is an animated TV series that is on Netflix that focuses on the main character BoJack, who goes through all different types of experiences expressing his mental health and some lows of his life. The show also shows his emotions, but in raw, so you get to see how he handles it in a very in-depth manner. But some viewers really, really loved this show, and one of the viewers said, honestly, one of the most realistic deceptions of living with anxiety and depression. I love that it shows the ugly sides of depression rather than painting the typical beautiful and tragically sad life. This is something that throughout so many other TV shows, they glorify having depression and they make it look like, oh, maybe I'm only sad for like 2 days, and then they show it something else, like, oh, it's easier and it gets better and stuff like instantly. But that's not the proper like reality side of it, if you know what I mean. It's not like that at all. And TV shows do have that type of thing where they do romanticize and glorify certain mental illnesses, which, speaking of, one thing, the way modern television represents mental health, and with it not always being somewhat accurate, it can really set us back as a society. It's also hard for people who struggle with a certain mental illness, as for example, it's portrayed in a completely non-reliable way. It can make someone who suffers with that illness feel like they don't have the illness themselves. For example, a show can show different like symptoms or struggling in a different way, and it can really make that person feel bad, or if they're not, like, it makes them feel like they're faking their illness, and it's not really helpful for somebody, because if you watch a TV show you might try and find comfort in characters, especially if you have like a mental illness or something and you want to find a character that you can relate to, but then shows not doing it accurately is kind of like, oh, am I the one that's not handling it correctly? Am I the one in the wrong? Or is it the show that's not portraying it properly? So with that, another article that I found reads, a lot of TV shows and films often depict people with mental health problems as psychopaths or violent, or can be quite sensationalist in their approach. With that being showed in televisions, it can make people that suffer with a certain mental illness feel as if they're imposed as a threat to society, which doesn't seem right, because, I mean, somebody suffering with a mental illness isn't a threat to society just because a TV show is showing it that way. Like, nobody's a threat to society, especially if you have like a mental illness. Like, it's weird to show, or it's weird to know that a TV show can put so much light on something so wrong, and for people to believe that, and be like, oh, well, if this person has this mental illness, they're clearly like a weapon or something. Like, it's not okay. It's really weird to think that TV shows have that power on, as I said, bringing such a, like, putting something into light, but in the wrong way, like the wrong thing into light, if you know what I mean. Like, it's not fine. That's not acceptable to make somebody that has an illness that they struggle with every day to feel like they're a psychopath or violent just because people don't quite understand it, and TV shows aren't doing that mental illness justice. Now, going back, we're going to go back to speaking about BoJack Horseman, as it has been said by the Times magazine that it's the most imported animated series since The Simpsons. BoJack Horseman tackles a lot of different mental health issues, from dealing with addiction to depression, and even focusing on a little bit on toxic relationships, which for a show that might seem, it is very heavy with all the things that it's talking about, but also people find this show really helpful and really relatable and can relate to BoJack himself. And like, I mean, if you go on social media, I best believe I'll be scrolling through TikTok and I'll find a BoJack Horseman quote and I'm like, wow, that is relatable. I understand what this quote means. And I have watched BoJack Horseman, and the show itself is just, it is something. And I can say that the way it brings mental health into light, and the way that it shows mental health is insane, but is also really good in what it does, and it doesn't put it into a bad light. Mental health, it portrays it in what I would say is the correct way. Another show that I want to talk about is Normal People. I don't know a lot about Normal People, which is pretty bad of me for meant to be doing research on the show, but I do know that Normal People has been, Normal People has gained awards and stuff for, I'm trying to think of what the word is. They've gained awards and stuff for how they portray men's mental health, which is something that's not really shown throughout a lot of TV shows, I don't think, or it hasn't been shown in a lot of TV shows, but is now coming into light now. Like, it's getting shown more throughout general television. So yeah, Normal People portrays men's mental health in a good way. It focuses on other themes as well, like loneliness, loss, and mental health in general. The show itself has received a particular praise for its realistic portrayal of men's mental health issues, and that's something that it's insane to see that that it's coming to life, men's mental health, and it's not being shunned upon, and it's finally getting the representation it needs. Now, moving on to one of my favourite television shows, I'm about to talk about Heartstopper. I'm going to issue here again that this part of Mindset is going to be really heavy, as two heavy topics are brought up. One is eating disorders, and the other one is self-harm. So, yeah, again, if you find this triggering, please click off. I'll also put timestamps at the beginning of the episode, like I usually do, but if this part's triggering for you, please click off, take care of yourself, and I'll see you again, hopefully. So, Heartstopper tackles eating disorders, depression, a lot of other mental illnesses too. And I'm going to be talking about a lot of scenes, actually. So, the first scene I want to discuss is in season 1, I'm pretty sure it's season 1, episode 1, where you start to see the main character, who's called Charlie Spring, have this issue with food, but it's not dived in deep. He's just stirring a bowl of cereal, but he's not actually eating it. He's just mixing the bowl around, like refusing himself to eat it, but he's like, I mean, he might have ate it. You don't know what happens after the camera cuts away. But throughout the whole entire season 1 of Heartstopper, he like hides away and he doesn't eat his lunch and stuff. But then at the end of season 1, I'm pretty sure it's episode 7 or episode 6, one of those two, Charlie goes to the cinema with his friends, well, his partner and his friend. No, his partner and not his friends, a group of boys that he doesn't get along with, and Nick, who is his partner, looks at him and he's like, oh, do you want popcorn? He's like, I'm not really hungry. He also does like, he also goes home that night and he cries and he's like, his sister is like, oh, do you want some pizza? And he's like, no, I'm fine. But as we get into season 2, this starts to become more prominent with Charlie having an eating disorder. And a quote that gets said throughout Heartstopper is that he says that it feels like the only thing that he can control in his life. And that quote, a lot of people found relatable, and I understand why, because restrictive eating and not wanting to eat and having the control of what you can eat and what you can't eat and all of that is so insane. And actually it shows that it's like he shows what it's like to have an eating disorder, but saying that one quote was really relatable. As I was looking at an article, somebody says the depiction of Charlie's experiences was so painfully relatable and probably one of the best portrayals I've seen on TV. Unlike some other TV shows which have done a poorly and also really triggering portrayal of eating disorders, for examples, Skins had a bad representation of it. People have found that the representation was actually really triggering, but in another way, Heartstopper done it where it wasn't as triggering for viewers to watch, even though in season 2 it's briefly touched on. Which I think you have that thing, not one thing's not going to be portrayed correctly in one show, and then you find a show that's hit the nail on the head and it's exactly what people need to see. Now, I want to touch on season 2 episode 8 of Heartstopper as well, where Charlie opens up about his self-harm experience from the past. Now, if you've never watched Heartstopper, little spoiler here, not saying I'm a Heartstopper fanatic, I've watched it over 51 times. Charlie gets bullied, he gets outed, and the bullying really does take a toll on him, which is insane. And obviously the one way that he coped with that is self-harm. Now, in season 2, episode 8, his boyfriend, Nick Nelson, was like, what's one thing you've never told? So Nick tells Charlie something and Nick's like, oh, what's one thing you haven't told me? And then Charlie opens up about the bullying, but then also opens up about his self-harm and how it made him feel and all of that. And the one thing I want to praise on this whole entire thing is that Nick, his boyfriend, listened to him. This scene was done so well in my eyes that every time I watch it I cry just because of how well done it is. But he's like, the one thing I really get about this is that Nick is wanting to help him. He's not babying him, he's not trying to rush him to go to a doctor. He just sits there, he feels comfortable comforting him, and he's trying to understand what he's going through and wants to help him, but communicating with him and not doing the wrong thing. Mental health in television sometimes can show how to respond to something like that in the wrong way. This show completely done it in a different way. They put it into such light of how to respond to someone correctly and how to handle that situation and not going the wrong way about it. Now, that's all I have to talk about on television shows and general mental health, general representation in it. But we're not done. We have an interview coming up. So let's go to our interview with, no surprise, Jude Bright. Here with me now, I have Jude. And Jude, I assume that you consume a lot of like TV shows and movies and stuff.
Yeah, I think I pride myself on being pretty media literate. I do try to keep up to date with movies, TV shows, and kind of current trends as a media student.
And with that, I'm going to ask you what you think about mental health and its representation in general television.
I think in general television, mental health throughout the years has grown to a lot more than what it was back in the kind of heyday of early 2000s TV. I think if you look at a TV show now, especially studios like Netflix, mental health is a much more discussed, openly and talked about subject within the kind of movies and TV.
Hold on. Has there been any TV shows in particular that have stood out to you to have like good representations of mental health?
I think the best one that even though I've not watched but I've heard of is probably Euphoria. That kind of deals with mental health from what I've heard. Various mental health topics and discussions are discussed and shown through that show, and kind of grown through. I think Brooklyn Nine-Nine is another good one. I think one of the characters suffered with a depression after a mission type of thing,
Yeah.
and stress after being locked up in prison. I think so those TV shows are kind of great because they show it in a way that hasn't been shown on TV before.
Is there any TV shows / movies that you think have bad representations of mental health?
I wouldn't say bad representations, but I think movies do it. I think TV shows portray mental health in a way that movies can't. With TV shows, you've got various episodes and seasons that can span over, that really can show and delve into the mental health aspects.
Yeah.
Whereas movies, they have to start it and finish it within a certain time frame.
Yeah.
They've only really got like 3 hours. But with TV shows, you can expand and really go into this, because real life, you're not gonna just fix your mental health within 3 hours. That's just not that just doesn't happen. So TV, I think, really is the stronger one here, with how it can show and portray mental health through various seasons and episodes in ways that movies can't.
Now, with some research that I'd done earlier, I looked at how people feel like that some shows that do represent mental illnesses in a bad way feel like themselves, if they have that mental illness themselves, they're not having it right because of how a TV show is portraying it. How do you feel about that?
Yes, I feel like it's really, really important for writers and producers to really actually understand what it is they're putting it on screen. If you just think that somebody that if you just think depression is somebody that's upset all the time, and doesn't smile or laugh, and you think that's what depression is, and you put that on screen, you're always going to get people who suffer from depression, like lash up. That isn't depression.
Yeah.
So it's really important, I think, for studios and everything to get the proper representation on screen, so people that watching that maybe do have these mental health issues can actually look up and almost see, right, this character's doing this. This character, I can kind of relate to this character. This character's going through the same stuff as me, and then also, if the character gets help, that's something that I can look at. That's something that is an option for me, which I think is really important.
And finally, has a representation of mental health helped you in any way, shape or form to understand mental health in a deeper and or better way?
I think as well, through high school, mental health was just kind of now being talked about. There wasn't a lot on it. But with TV shows, if a character kind of comes out and says, I've got this mental health problem, the main kind of focus is of like support and how to not work around, but how to help that person. I think that's what's really good as well for people that aren't struggling with mental health, that they can look and see, oh, this person done this in this TV show with this person that was also struggling, and I know somebody in real life that's doing that. This is how it's kind of done on the TV show, and that's done in a good way, so I'm going to maybe a similar approach. Or maybe if it's done in a bad way, forbid, kind of know what not to do. But I think it is really kind of important in that aspect.
Media is very good for putting a limelight on how to handle things properly. Like, there's a lot of, like, this is obviously not in general television, but Instagram, there's a lot of ways to be like, this is not what to say to somebody that has depression. This is what to do if someone has depression. Like, I think social media and mental health and TV shows are very great aspects to show mental health in such, not a beautiful way, but in a good way. Obviously, there's going to be negatives, such as something's not being portrayed right, or they've got it wrong, or this person isn't communicating and all that, and that's fine. So with that, I just want to say thank you for taking your time of your day to do this interview with me and tell me your side of what you think about mental health and how it's represented in general television.
No problem. Thank you for having me, Devyn.
And a huge thank you to Jude for doing that interview and giving us his insight of what he thinks about mental health and its general representation in television. Now, as a little conclusion, I would like to say that mental health's came a long way, obviously, but in television, it's grown quite a lot, and I would say that there's always going to be a bad representation and good representation. Whether you can figure out what good representation is, who knows? Whether you can pick out what bad representation is, you're gonna have shows that are never gonna really hit the nail on the head unless you've got somebody who's had experience with certain mental illnesses and talking about it, and having that person behind the scenes saying, "You're doing this right, you're doing this right, you're doing this right." Are you gonna have that all the time? No. But you're also gonna get TV shows that can absolutely hit the nail on the head with portraying something right and understanding what needs to be done, how it can be solved, how somebody can be helped, and how that mental illness needs to be portrayed without it coming across as triggering or upsetting someone or just something like that. Mental health in television has, yet again, as I said, generally has came a long way from 20 years ago to now. I'm pretty sure there was a lot more bad representation in 20 years ago than there is today. Now, there's always going to be parts of mental illnesses that are going to be glorified and romanticised and made to look all sunshines and rainbows and pretty. But just remember, there is always going to be a bad side to mental illness. Recovery is a process that everybody has to go through when they're tackling a mental illness, and that's what some shows show that person getting recovered straight away. Just before I end off the episode, I just want to let you know that you're doing amazing. I'm proud of you. Speaking up isn't weak. It's okay to cry, no matter what. If you feel like it's not getting better, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not in a month's time, but I promise you it will get better at some point. I've been Devyn McQuaid. You've been listening to Mindset. Come along to the next episode and maybe we can talk about your mindset.